I'm Riven, and on my 13th birthday, my parents took me on a special trip and left me standing alone in front of a grave. No goodbye, no turning back, just one sentence before they drove off. This is your gift. Survive on your own. For hours, I screamed their names into the cold wind, but all I heard was their final whisper. You never existed. They erased me. But what they didn't know, what they still don't know, is that someone was watching from the abandoned house next door. And that night, the war for my name began. I can still smell the damp leaves from that night. Even now, decades later, when autumn comes to Oklahoma, a single whiff of wet earth pulls me back to the back seat of that car. I was 13, cheeks pressed to the cold window, thinking I was about to start the best birthday of my life. My parents had said we were going on a trip. A surprise, my mother called it, with a smile that never reached her eyes. My father didn't bother to smile at all. He just gripped the steering wheel tighter whenever I asked where we were going. The drive stretched on past the outskirts of town, through miles of empty fields where the power lines sagged like tired ropes. I watched the sky turn from pink to dark steel as the sun slid away. My stomach fluttered with both excitement and unease. My grandfather had promised me something. A future, he'd said, when I turned 18. I thought maybe this trip was about him, maybe a birthday dinner or a visit to a cabin he'd left me. I clung to that hope while the road got narrower and rougher, the asphalt giving way to gravel. The car slowed near a row of crooked headstones at the edge of a forgotten cemetery. It was the kind of place you don't visit unless you have to. Fences half fallen, weeds twisting around old markers, no lights except a flickering porch bulb from an abandoned house across the road. My father cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, like a door closing. Out, he said flatly. I blinked. Why? Where are we? My mother's voice was smooth and sharp. This is your gift. Survive on your own. For a moment, I thought it was some twisted joke. What are you talking about? My voice cracked. It's my birthday. Where's Grandpa? He's dead, my father said without looking at me. And so are his promises. The words landed like stones. My mother opened her door, stepped out, and pulled my small duffel bag from the trunk. She set it down on the gravel without meeting my eyes. Then she leaned into the car window and hissed, You never existed. Remember that. Something inside me snapped silent. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. When I finally stumbled out of the car, the cold air bit through my jacket. I reached for the bag, but my father had already shifted the car into gear. Gravel spat from the tires as they pulled away, taillights shrinking until they vanished into the black. I stood there in the fading glow of their headlights, heart hammering. My duffel bag was lighter than it should have been. When I opened it, only a torn blanket and a half-empty bottle of water stared back at me. No food, no flashlight, no phone. They hadn't even left me my coat. Wind scraped through the dry grass. The cemetery was silent, except for the rustling leaves. I tried to tell myself this was a test, that they'd circle back and laugh and say I'd passed. But the only answer was the echo of my mother's words. You never existed, bouncing off the headstones. I walked between the graves, looking for a name I recognized, a sign that this was some twisted inheritance ceremony. But all I found were strangers' names eroded by rain. The ground felt uneven under my sneakers, like it could swallow me whole. Then I saw it. Across the narrow road, the abandoned house. At first, it was just a silhouette, broken windows staring like empty eyes. Then a flicker of light appeared inside, dim and steady, as if someone had lit a candle. My heart thumped harder. Was it a squatter? A ghost? Someone who might help or hurt me? I wrapped the torn blanket around my shoulders and crouched behind a cracked headstone, trying to calm my breath. The night smelled of iron and smoke. I thought of my grandfather's promise. When you're 18, you'll have what you need to be free. What did that mean now? Did he know my parents would do this? The fear was hot in my throat, but underneath it something colder began to form. A seed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the first quiet flare of anger. A thought I'd never dared. They're wrong about me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. No one was coming. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The car was gone, the road empty, my parents' words hanging in the air like frost. I looked again at the house across the cemetery. The faint light flickered once, then steadied. Someone was in there. Maybe my only chance to not freeze, to not disappear like they wanted. I stood slowly, clutching the blanket tighter, and stepped toward the gate. The wind picked up as I stepped off the gravel and crossed the road. Dry leaves spun across the cracked pavement, chasing one another like ghosts. I tightened the blanket around my shoulders, feeling its thin fabric do little against the cold. The porch of the house looked worse up close, boards warped from years of rain and sun, the paint flaking like old skin. But the light in the window was still there, soft and steady, like it had been waiting for me. I hesitated at the edge of the yard. This could go bad fast. I was 13, alone, abandoned. I had no clue who or what waited inside that house. But freezing out here didn't feel like much of a plan either. Each step toward the porch creaked louder in my head than it did underfoot. I reached the door and saw that it was already ajar, cracked open just wide enough to show a sliver of hallway cloaked in shadow. My throat tightened. I pushed gently. The door moaned open on rusted hinges. The air inside smelled like old wood and tobacco, not fresh smoke, just the kind that sinks into the walls and never leaves. I stepped in, careful, listening. Floorboards groaned beneath me. To my left, a small living room opened up, the couch half collapsed under its own age. A dusty coat hung from a nail. A metal ashtray on the floor held a single stubbed-out cigarette. Someone lived here, or had been here recently. I called out, not loud, more a whisper than anything else. Hello? No answer. The wind slipped through the open door behind me, rattling the edges of a curtain. I stepped further inside. An old photo sat crooked on a side table, black and white, a young soldier and a woman in a dress, both staring straight into the camera like they didn't trust it. Dust coated the glass. Then I heard it, a voice, deep and weathered, coming from the hallway. Close the door if you're coming in, and keep your feet off the rug. I jumped. It wasn't a yell, but it wasn't welcoming either. I turned, closed the door gently, and looked down. Sure enough, a frayed rug stretched across the floor, and I had one muddy shoe print dead center. I stepped back onto the wood. I didn't mean to trespass, I stammered. You just got dumped in the middle of nowhere and figured you'd try your luck with the local ghost, the voice said closer now. Don't flatter yourself. You weren't the first. He stepped into the light. Older, maybe mid-60s. Tall, built like someone who used to do heavy work but hadn't touched a gym in years. His beard was graying and uneven. His eyes were sharp and tired at the same time. He wore a flannel shirt that had probably been red once but now looked more like rust. He studied me for a long moment. I could feel the weight of his gaze, like he was trying to figure out what kind of trash had just blown onto his porch. I'm not here to cause trouble, I said quickly. My parents, they left me. I don't have anywhere to go. He didn't blink. People always got somewhere to go. Most just don't like what they find when they get there. I swallowed hard. They told me it was a birthday trip. They took me to the cemetery and said I didn't exist. That finally got a reaction. His brow shifted, not softening exactly, more like registering that my story wasn't a lie. You got a name, boy? Riven. He grunted. Sit. He motioned toward a wooden chair by the window. I sat. The legs wobbled. My stomach growled and I hugged the blanket tighter, hoping he hadn't heard it. You hungry? He asked. I nodded. He didn't move. Then remember this. Out here, crying don't get you fed. Screaming don't get you heard. You want to survive, you earn it. He turned and walked toward what I guessed was the kitchen. I heard the clink of a pot and the hiss of a burner. I sat there, heart pounding, unsure if I should bolt or stay. But my feet stayed glued to the floor. He hadn't kicked me out. That had to count for something. He returned a few minutes later with a dented metal bowl and a spoon. He placed it in front of me, a thin broth, beans and something green floating in it. I didn't hesitate. I ate like I hadn't seen food in days. Slow down, he said, not unkindly. Ain't a race. I nodded, grateful and humiliated all at once. I wiped my mouth with my sleeve. Why'd they leave you? he asked finally, settling into a recliner with a torn armrest. I shook my head. My grandfather promised me something for when I turned 18. I think they wanted to cut me out. Maybe they already did. He leaned back, rubbed his jaw. You ain't the first kid betrayed by blood, and you sure as hell won't be the last. There was no pity in his tone, but there was something else, recognition, like he'd seen this kind of thing before. He stared at me for a long time, then said, I won't ask why you're still sitting here, but if you are, you better understand something. I waited. If you want to survive here, you'll need more than tears. No one gives a damn about your sob story. Not the cold, not the dark, not the people who put you here. So you either learn or you leave. His words didn't sting the way I thought they would. They grounded me. For the first time since the cemetery, I felt like I was being told the truth. Not dressed up lies in a birthday bow, just reality. Raw and ugly. I looked at him. I want to learn. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. That remains to be seen, he said. And that was it. My first night didn't end with comfort. There were no blankets tucked around me, no soft voice saying it would be okay. I slept on the floor, curled in my own jacket, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. He didn't say goodnight. He just disappeared into the back room, leaving me alone with the creaking walls and the chill air slipping through the broken windows. I curled up in the corner on a patch of rug that wasn't too filthy, pulled my blanket tight around me, and watched the shadows sway until my eyes finally closed. When I woke, it was still dark outside. Cold bit at my face. My joints ached from sleeping on the floor, and for a few seconds, I couldn't remember where I was. Then the smell of old coffee and firewood hit me, and it all came rushing back. The cemetery, the betrayal, the man in flannel who didn't ask questions but didn't throw me out either. Days passed like that. Gray mornings, bitter air, silence stretching between us like a tightrope I didn't dare fall off. He never told me his name. He barked orders. Split that wood. Go check the water line. Stack those crates near the shed. He didn't soften his tone, and he sure didn't care if I was sore or bleeding or ready to quit. He handed me gloves 2 sizes too big and expected me to learn by doing. When I dropped the axe once, he didn't flinch. Then pick it up. Swing again. I wanted to yell at him, ask him why he was so cold, but then I'd hear my mom's voice again. You never existed. And suddenly, chopping firewood didn't feel so cruel. It felt like something that might keep me from disappearing altogether. The days dragged. My muscles stiffened. My fingers cracked from the cold. We barely spoke. But I noticed things. The way he always left a second bowl of soup on the table, even if he never acknowledged it. How he'd mutter to himself when reading an old newspaper, like the world had moved on without asking his permission. And once, when he thought I wasn't looking, he adjusted the blanket over my legs when I'd fallen asleep sitting up near the stove. One evening, after hauling buckets of water from a nearby stream, I asked what had been gnawing at me since the night I arrived. Why are you even helping me? I said, trying to sound more grown than I felt. He didn't look up from sharpening a blade, just said, Why do you think? I don't know. Maybe because you feel sorry for me. He scoffed. Sorry doesn't build fences. Sorry won't fix a broken heater. So what then? I asked. You don't even know me. He finally stopped, laid the knife down, then leaned back in his chair and stared through me. Your grandfather saved my life once, he said quietly, when no one else gave a damn whether I lived or died. The silence after that felt thick. I waited, but he didn't explain further. He never told me about you, I said. He wouldn't have. That wasn't how he did things. Your grandfather, well, he didn't speak promises. He acted them out, quiet, solid. You knew what he meant by what he did, not what he said. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. What did he save you from? That's a story for another time, he said. If ever. He stood up, stretched his back with a grunt, then added without looking at me. That old man trusted me with some things. Not all. Just enough. And I don't forget debts, even if your folks pretend the past never happened. Something shifted in me then. The man wasn't just some drifter in an old house. He was part of something larger, a thread in the messy fabric of my family, tangled but tied. For the first time since the graveyard, I didn't feel like I was floating in the dark. I still didn't know where I stood, but I wasn't completely alone in the storm. Over the next few days, I started to move differently. My hands still blistered, but I worked without complaining. I paid attention. I watched how he cleaned his tools, how he listened for birds before he stepped outside, how he scanned the tree line like it might bite him. I didn't ask about the war medals tucked in a drawer or the letters tied with twine in a tin under the floorboards, but I saw them. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it mattered. People betray for three reasons, he said once. Greed, fear, or pride. Sometimes all three. Your folks, bet they hit the trifecta. I wanted to defend them. Part of me still clung to the idea that maybe this was a mistake, that they'd come back. But the sound of my mother's voice, cold and final, burned that hope every time it flickered. At night, I lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the inheritance. What had my grandfather really meant? Was it money, land, or was it something harder? Like the kind of strength this man was forcing into me with every chore, every silence. I didn't know yet, but I was starting to learn. The days had grown shorter. Wind swept across the land with a sharpness that sliced through every layer of fabric I wore. Frost crusted the edges of gravestones like fragile lace, and even the trees stood stiff, bare, and brittle. That morning started like the rest, quiet, cold, and gray. I was outside, carrying wood to the side of the house, my breath coming out in clouds that vanished into the frozen air. The man had taught me not to waste movement. Cold steals more than comfort, he'd said. It'll rob your body if you let it. I'd nearly reached the back steps when I heard it, the crunch of tires over gravel. My feet froze. The blood drained from my face. A car. Not just any car. Their car. I dropped the firewood and ran, half slipping on the frozen ground, my heart thudding like it was trying to punch through my ribs. For a few precious seconds, I was a boy again, not the one abandoned in a graveyard, not the one chopping wood to earn warmth. Just a son, hoping his parents had finally changed their minds. They stepped out slowly. My father first, still in that same old tan coat with the busted zipper. My mother followed, wrapped in a heavy scarf, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses even though there was no sun to block. I stopped short about 10 feet away from them. Mom? Dad? They didn't answer. I moved closer. You came back. My mother brushed past me like I was wind. I turned, stunned, as my father opened the trunk, pulled out a shovel, and without so much as a glance at me, walked straight toward the cemetery. I followed in a daze, my breath catching in my throat. They stopped at the far side, near my grandfather's grave. My mother knelt, brushing frost from the earth. He said he hid it near the roots, she muttered. The will? My father asked, kneeling beside her. She nodded. Or something. We can't risk that boy getting his hands on it. If it's what your father promised him, it'll ruin everything. My jaw clenched. That boy. Not our son, not Riven. Just an obstacle. I took another step forward, fists balled. What are you doing? I demanded. That was when my father looked up, right at me, for the first time, and shoved me aside like I was nothing. I stumbled back, landing hard on the frozen grass, the impact knocking the air out of me. For a second, the world spun. The sound of digging filled the silence, metal hitting frozen ground. Then a hand reached out, pulled me to my feet. It was him, the man from the house. His face unreadable, but his grip steady. Don't speak, he said, voice low. Watch. I turned to look again. My mother wiped her hands on her coat, her face flushed with frustration. It has to be here, he said, by the oldest stone. Dig wider, my father said, voice flat. They're not even here for me, I whispered, more to myself than anyone. They never were, the man replied. Their greed runs deeper than roots. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat, eyes stinging. All those nights I'd told myself it was a mistake, that they were scared, that maybe they thought they were doing what was best. But standing there watching them tear up sacred ground, tossing aside handfuls of earth like it was trash, I knew the truth. I hadn't been abandoned because I was unwanted. I'd been abandoned because I was in the way, a liability to whatever inheritance they were chasing. I felt the man's hand rest on my shoulder. You understand now? I nodded. They don't see you, he said. Not really, but I do. And more importantly, you should. After what felt like an hour, my parents gave up. My father tossed the shovel back in the trunk, his hands dirty. My mother pulled her scarf tighter and got into the passenger seat without a word. They didn't look back. Not once. The car backed out slowly, tires crunching over the same gravel they'd rolled in on. The sound faded until all that remained was the whisper of the wind and the echo of something breaking in me. Quiet, final. Later, inside the house, the man poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs. One for him, one for me. He said nothing. Neither did I. But something had changed. Hope didn't die that day. It turned cold and hard like the frost-covered ground, but it lived on, reshaped into something sharper. I sat by the fire that night watching flames flicker across the walls and made a vow, one I never said out loud but felt burning inside me. If they wanted me gone, erased, forgotten, I'd make sure the world remembered me instead. The fire had long since gone out. Cold seeped in through the cracks in the walls like a silent enemy, wrapping itself around my bones and whispering cruel thoughts into my ears. I sat curled in the farthest corner of the room, where the wind didn't quite reach, but the loneliness did. My hands were raw, split open at the knuckles, red with cold and the sting of splinters from endless wood chopping. My clothes hung off me, too big now for a boy who hadn't eaten properly in days. The man, as usual, said little. He handed me a tin cup of broth each night and watched as I drank it slowly, like he was measuring how much fight I had left. He never told me I was strong. He never said I'd make it, but he never turned me away either. I think that's what made it worse. His silence. Because silence made room for the voices in my head. You were never meant to be anything. Even your own parents couldn't pretend to love you. That night, the wind howled louder than ever, carrying leaves and bits of debris across the porch. I pressed my back against the wall, arms wrapped around myself, shaking. Not from fear, not just from cold, but from the weight of it all. I wanted out of the frostbitten mornings, the aching fingers, the cracked lips, the hollow belly, out of the memories. For a long time, I thought about walking, just leaving, finding the highway, throwing myself at the mercy of strangers, or even worse, at the feet of my parents again, begging, apologizing for something I never did, just to make the pain stop. I stood up and paced, breathing shallow. My legs were weak, but I had to move or I'd freeze. That's when I saw it. A half-broken dresser, wedged in the corner of the room no one used. The bottom drawer was stuck, crooked and stubborn like everything in that house. I pulled at it, more to keep busy than anything else, and with a loud crack, it gave. Inside, nothing but moth-eaten cloth and a sealed envelope browned with age. My heart stopped. It had my name on it. Riven, not boy, not that kid, not him. My actual name, written in a hand I hadn't seen in years. Trembling, I opened it. The paper inside was thin, the ink faded in places, but the words were clear. If you are reading this, it means you've already been tested. You have faced the cold, the hunger, the silence, and you're still standing. Riven, you were never meant to be disposable. You are my blood, and with that comes a burden and a gift. This land, this legacy, they are not just dirt and wood and faded names on stone. They are yours. If you have the courage to endure, they will come for it. They will come for you. But if you survive, you will not just inherit a name, you will become one. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there on the floor, letter shaking in my hands, and let those words wrap around me like a blanket made of truth. My grandfather, he knew, he saw what was coming, and he believed I might live long enough to read those words. Suddenly, everything shifted. The cold was still there. The ache, the hunger, all of it still clung to me. But now, there was purpose. There was a reason. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the inner lining of my coat. It stayed close to my chest, close to my heart, like armor. The man came in later after midnight. He glanced at me, and for once he didn't say anything sharp or hard. "You found it," he said simply. I nodded. He didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. He just stared at me a moment longer, then turned away. That night, as the house creaked under the weight of winter, I lay on the floor near the fireless hearth, the letter pressing against my ribs like a heartbeat. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was planning to win. The wind bit harder the next morning, blowing snow sideways like tiny blades against the broken windows. I sat by the old stove, watching the embers die slower than my thoughts. The letter was tucked deep in my coat, pressed to my skin like a warning and a promise. I kept it close, even while chopping wood or drawing water from the half-frozen well. I didn't dare let it out of my sight. 3 days passed like ghosts. Then came the tire tracks. I saw them first, fresh cuts in the slush leading up the narrow dirt path. I stood at the edge of the porch, heart pounding, and I knew. My breath clouded in front of me, the cold forgotten. They were back. This time, not just my parents. Another vehicle followed. A dark green SUV. Out stepped Uncle Neil, my father's cousin, and behind him, Aunt Rhonda, clutching her purse like it might be holding something more than lipstick. The door of the lead car slammed. My mother's heels crunched on the frost. Her coat looked expensive. Her voice cut through the air before I even saw her face. "Where is it?" she snapped. I stepped down off the porch, my voice dry from the cold and silence barely worked. "Mom?" She didn't even flinch, didn't look surprised I was still alive, just disgusted. My father came around from the other side, his jaw clenched, holding a folded piece of paper. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, waving it like a weapon. "Writing letters to yourself, pretending he left you something." Uncle Neil gave a weak chuckle like he didn't want to be there but found the situation amusing anyway. "Poor kid's been out here too long." They marched toward me in a line, their boots crushing the snow-covered grass of the cemetery. Aunt Rhonda whispered something under her breath. I caught the word delusional. I backed up slowly. "I didn't forge anything," I said, voice shaky. "It was his. He left it for me." "That's a lie," my mother snapped, finally looking at me. Her eyes were colder than the wind. "You always were good at making things up, just like when you cried for attention as a child. Useless then, pathetic now." My cheeks burned. Behind me, the older man had stepped out of the shadows. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, silent, watching. My father moved fast. In 3 strides, he was in front of me, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into my jacket. "You think you're going to steal what's rightfully ours? You think you matter? That name doesn't belong to you." I yanked free. My knees shook, but I stood tall. "He left it for me," I said again, louder this time. "You left me to die. He didn't." My mother laughed, not like she found it funny, but like something in her cracked. "You ungrateful little freak," she hissed. "This whole act, it's over. You come near the house again, you'll be treated like a trespasser." Uncle Neil shifted. "Maybe we should call someone. Get him placed somewhere." "You want the courts involved?" The older man finally spoke. His voice was low, even. It stopped everyone cold. "You sure about that?" They froze. My parents exchanged a look, quick, sharp, silent. They turned. Without another word, they stalked off toward their cars. My father flung one last line over his shoulder. "Next time, you won't have anywhere to hide." The sound of the engines roared like thunder as they drove off, flinging dirty snow behind them. I didn't move, couldn't, not until I heard the porch creak. The older man was still watching me. "You showed your teeth tonight," he said, matter of fact. "Good." I swallowed hard. "But they didn't care. They still see me as nothing." He nodded slowly. "Teeth alone don't win wars, but they stop people from thinking you'll always be silent." That night, I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching snow fall under the pale moonlight. The letter rested in my hands again. My name on the envelope had never felt more real. I traced it with my finger. I wasn't safe, not anymore, but I was awake. The first sign was silence. Not the kind that came with snow or dusk, but a deliberate hush and avoidance. People I used to wave at across the street now turned their backs. Shopkeepers I'd seen since I was a child glanced up from behind the counter, then pretended not to see me. One even turned the open sign to closed while I was still outside. At first I thought it was in my head. Maybe they were just busy, distracted. Maybe it was me, overreading every glance. But then I heard the whispers. He's that boy, the one who lost it. Did you hear what he did at the cemetery? I heard he forged papers, tried to take something that wasn't his. They didn't say my name, but I felt every word land like a rock in my chest. It had been almost a month since my parents last came to the house. I thought the worst was over. But the real war wasn't fought with fists. It was fought with stories, lies whispered loud enough to be believed. I kept to myself. Spent more time in the woods behind the cemetery than in town, but even the trees couldn't muffle the sting of being erased. One morning I tried to buy nails from the general store for the broken window. The woman behind the register looked at me like I'd walked in naked and bleeding. "We don't carry your kind of business," she said flatly. "I've bought nails here since I was 7, I replied. "Well, things change," she snapped, already turning away. By the time I reached the abandoned house again, my fists were clenched so tight the nails bit into my palms. I found the older man chopping wood in the back lot. He didn't look up when I dropped the empty sack beside him. "They've poisoned everything," I muttered. "Everyone." He didn't stop, just split another log clean through the center. "You think it's about the people?" he said calmly. "It's never about them. It's about how deep you let the poison run inside you." I turned away, shoulders trembling. "You could have stopped them. You could have told someone, shown them I'm not lying." The axe stopped mid-swing. "You think truth beats noise?" he said. "You think folks care what's real? They listen to the voice that screams the longest." I stared at him, stunned. "So what? Do I just let them win?" He walked past me into the house without another word. I followed, furious. He led me to the corner cabinet in the living room. I'd opened it dozens of times before, found nothing but old wires, dust, and a broken radio. This time, he pulled up the false bottom. Inside was a tin box, rusted on the edges but sealed tight. He set it on the table and gestured for me to open it. I did, slowly. Inside were papers, yellowed deeds, bank slips, ledgers, a handwritten list of names, dates, and at the very bottom, folded carefully, a photograph. My grandfather, standing beside the older man, both in front of the same porch I now slept on. Their hands clasped tight, faces hard but steady. On the back, in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, "I trust this man more than blood. If anything happens, he will know what to do." My hands shook as I held it. "This," I started, but my voice cracked. He leaned against the doorframe. "It won't shut them up, but it'll shut the right mouths, in the right rooms." Tears stung my eyes, not from sadness, but from something that felt close to power. "They're saying I'm dangerous, unstable." "Good," he said. I blinked. "Let them think that. Makes them cautious. They don't fear kindness. They fear the unpredictable." The rain started that night, soft at first, then heavier. I sat by the stove, the photograph in my lap, the box of truth beside me. No more hiding, no more begging. I held the photograph close, knowing it was my only weapon, but I also knew once I used it, there would be no turning back. I tucked the photograph deep into my coat pocket, pressing it flat against my chest. It felt warmer than the wind outside, like a small engine humming under my ribs. I'd stared at it for hours the night before, memorizing every wrinkle on my grandfather's face, every line in his signature. It wasn't just paper, it was a weapon. And tonight, I would finally use it. The church hall was already lit up when I got there. From the outside, it glowed soft gold through the stained glass windows, but inside it was all eyes and whispers. Folding chairs filled the open space, lined up in uneven rows. The room smelled like old hymn books and cheap coffee. Folks who'd known me since I was in diapers turned their heads when I walked in, as if they didn't recognize me. Or worse, as if they did and wished they didn't. I kept my shoulders square and walked toward the back. I didn't want a front row seat to my own erasure. My parents stood near the pulpit, dressed in dark tones like they were mourning more than just a man. Their voices echoed faintly as they greeted neighbors and distant relatives with practiced smiles. Mom dabbed the corners of her eyes with a white handkerchief, like grief came in scheduled intervals. Dad stood beside her, stiff-backed, eyes scanning the room. Both had that gleam, the one they wore during courtroom dramas or property auctions, when their faces looked like masks and their voices became theater. It didn't take long before they took center stage. The pastor gave a few words about legacy, community, faith. Then he stepped aside, and my mother took the microphone like it was a crown. My father was a man of principle, she began, her voice thick with emotion I didn't believe. He valued tradition, he valued clarity in family affairs, and above all, he hated confusion. She smiled sadly. Which is why, before he passed, he ensured his wishes were clear. Dad stepped forward holding a folder of documents that looked far too new for someone who'd been gone almost a year. "We want to clear the air," he said. "There's been misunderstandings and harmful rumors about inheritance, about relationships, about who belongs and who doesn't." A chill ran up my spine. I knew what was coming, but hearing it out loud still made my hands clench. "We have in our possession," he continued, "official documentation, verified by legal channels, that our son, Riven, has unfortunately experienced a break from reality. We love him, but he is not, and has never been, the rightful heir to anything tied to our father's estate." The crowd murmured. Some gasped. Others nodded. A woman in the front row crossed her arms and whispered something behind her palm. I looked around and caught glimpses of disbelief. But not for them. For me, I wanted to shout, to scream, to rip the microphone from their hands. But instead I stayed seated. I waited until my father's last word echoed off the back wall like a gunshot. Then I stood. My chair scraped the wooden floor. Heads turned. I didn't walk quickly. I didn't make a scene. Just one step at a time, steady. Toward the same table where they had just laid out their lies. I reached into my coat, pulled out the photograph, and placed it gently on the table, facing the crowd. Gasps broke the hush. Then I unfolded the letter. My voice didn't shake, though everything inside me did. "To my grandson," I read, loud and clear. "The youngest, the one who will carry what others cannot." Dead silence, no shuffling, no coughs, not even the buzz of the overhead lights. Just my voice, and the sound of two people losing their grip on the room. "My grandfather wrote this," I continued, "with his own hand, dated and signed weeks before his death. That photograph," I pointed without looking at them, "shows him with the man he trusted most, the man who witnessed his final words, not lawyers, not signatures passed through notaries in cities far from here. Real words, real legacy." I folded the letter. No one moved. Then someone near the back, old Mr. LeMay, who'd fixed our gutters once when I was 5, cleared his throat. "I remember that porch. I remember your grandfather." That's his handwriting. Whispers shifted, like wind changing direction. My mother blinked too fast. Dad's jaw tightened. I watched their performance slip, crack by careful crack. Mom's voice was brittle when she spoke again. "He's confused. That's what we meant. It's all very emotional." But the crowd didn't nod this time. The pastor stepped forward, unease clear in his posture. "Perhaps we need time to look over everything properly," he said. "Privately." I stepped away from the table. I didn't need applause. I didn't expect a parade. I just wanted truth to sit in the room longer than their lies. As I walked back down the aisle, my gaze met the older man's. He was in the back corner, leaning against the exit door. He didn't smile, didn't nod, but he met my eyes with a quiet knowing, like we'd both seen a battle turn in real time. Outside, the air was crisp, sharp with early spring. I felt it fill my lungs, not as a threat, but as proof I was still standing. But victory is never simple, because in exposing them, I had also exposed myself, and the war was far from over. The years after that night moved in slow, uneven steps, not like a triumphant march, but more like limping through thick mud. You don't notice how far you've come until you look down and see the stains all over your boots. I stayed in Oklahoma longer than I thought I would. The abandoned house eventually collapsed in on itself after a tornado grazed it one spring, as if the past decided to bury itself. The town changed. Not much, but enough. A new gas station went up where the old bakery used to be. Kids I knew grew up, left, some came back, and people stopped whispering when I walked by. Not because they forgot, but because they knew. My parents didn't go quietly. After the memorial, they tried everything. Fake lawsuits, interviews with whatever local paper would listen, calling me disturbed, dangerous, delusional. But the paper trail was too solid, the photograph too real, and the town too tired of their theater. Their reputation cracked in public, and even the relatives who once nodded along started keeping their distance. Some quietly told me years later, "We knew something wasn't right, we just didn't want to get involved." That used to make me angry. Now I just nod. Fear makes cowards out of people, even decent ones. The older man, the one who stood in the shadows when I was 13, the one who never flinched, stayed around longer than anyone expected. I never learned his full story. He never offered it. But he taught me to split wood right, how to read contracts, how to stay quiet long enough for liars to dig their own graves. He wasn't gentle, but he was loyal. He died the winter I turned 28. No family at the funeral. Just me, the pastor, and the caretaker who dug the hole. I spoke 3 words over his grave. "You were right." Then I left and I didn't come back for 5 years. Until tonight. I parked just outside the cemetery gate. The sky had turned that dusky blue-gray you only get in early spring when the wind still bites, but the ground has started to breathe again. Mud clung to my boots as I walked, each step a soft squelch. The candle was in my coat pocket, wrapped in waxed paper, and under my arm, a sapling, strong roots, bare branches, ready to grow. I found my grandfather's grave easily. Muscle memory, I guess. The headstone had faded a bit, weathered and cracked at the base. I knelt beside it, brushing off dried leaves and bits of gravel. I didn't speak right away. Some things don't need to be said out loud, but in my mind, I whispered the things I'd carried for decades. You were right. They tried. I survived. I dug the hole carefully, my hands stiff from the cold, but steady. The sapling slid into the soil like it belonged there. When I patted the earth down around it, I imagined roots already snaking down beneath, wrapping around the bones of the past. Not to choke them, but to remind them something new is growing here. Then I lit the candle. Same act I'd done when I was 13, starving and scared and invisible. But now the flame didn't flicker in desperation. It stood tall, steady, surrounded by the kind of silence that feels earned. I stayed until the light dimmed, until the wind picked up and scattered a few petals from the nearby dogwoods, until the cemetery no longer felt like a prison, but a place of peace. I carry scars. That much is true. Some on my skin, most on my memory, but they aren't shameful. They're evidence that I was here, that I endured, that I fought not for revenge, but for truth. I remember once, in the middle of that mess, my mother shouted at me, "You don't exist. You never did." She was wrong. I exist. I survived. And that is enough.